Baker Mayfield wins his opening game against the Raiders a week ago. What happens on Monday Night Football? That's coming up next on Locked On Rams.
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single day, free and available wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Travis Rogers. Thanks for making us a part of what you do each and every day. I would ask that you follow me on Twitter at Travis Rogers, that we get all of your Rams news. Not only do I host the Locked On Rams podcast, but I also host the Rams pre, half, and post-game show. I've been doing that since they came back to Los Angeles back in 2016. This is my 7th season doing that, so plugged into the team pretty good right there. And, of course, I host the Trav and Slee show every day on ESPN 710 from 10 a.m. until 1 p.m. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On, that is in all caps, Locked On, in the game store. All right, here's what's coming up on the pod today. I want to just talk about this season collectively. The Rams are 4-10, and how did we get here, and what's to look forward to over these final 3 games, and just kind of an assessment of where this team is as you head into the home stretch here. The Rams have had one particular problem, well, more than one, but one really glaring problem all season long. We'll talk about that coming up in just a couple of minutes as well. But let's start right here. Let's start with Baker Mayfield's second game as a member of the Rams. His first start, remember, a week ago against the Raiders, he did not start that game, but rather he came off the bench after the opening series from John Wolford and played the rest of the way. So this was his first opportunity to start for the Rams, and just simply put, it did not go particularly well. The stat line is very modest. The production was even more modest. He finishes with 12 of 21 passing for 111 yards. Again, 12 completions for 111 yards, not exactly what you're looking for. He did throw a touchdown pass to Tyler Higbee, which was the first touchdown pass of the season. Yes, yeah, you heard me right. Game number 14, Tyler Higbee caught his first touchdown pass of the season, and he threw an interception on a ball that was kind of deflected at the line of scrimmage, which is something that Baker Mayfield has dealt with throughout his career. I think that this was just really a cold bucket of reality with regards to 2 things. Number one, where the Rams are this season, and number 2, what Baker Mayfield is as an NFL quarterback. Don't get me wrong. I was incredibly excited and enthusiastic about what we had seen in Week 14 against the Las Vegas Raiders. He came in, he gave them a spark, he made some throws that John Wolford and Bryce Perkins are simply incapable of, and had just that thing, that little walk, that strut, that energy, whatever you want to call it, that he brought to the field. And the Rams desperately needed it in that moment, and it helped them win a game and break that 6-game losing streak. And it was exciting. And it was a great story that somebody who had just come off of another team just a couple of days before, who had no time to practice with the squad, goes out there on the midweek game and lights it up. And it was great. And everyone was excited, myself included. The fact of the matter is, the reality was going to crash back in sooner rather than later, and sooner was on Monday Night Football against the Packers. They were unable to protect him. He was under duress all night long. He was sacked 5 times along the way, a lot of those sacks coming early. He really didn't understand the offense. He was talking about it afterwards and said that he had a better grip of it this week than he did 2 weeks ago. And this is what I mentioned earlier in the week on Locked On Rams, which is another good example of why you need to subscribe to Locked On Rams. Click that little plus, little check mark, little bookmark, whatever it may be in your podcast platform. But a little bit of knowledge is worse than none at all, right? Because you can talk yourself into things that aren't necessarily there. You can talk yourself into some decisions that really aren't particularly good ones. And I think that's what that was, that this was a little bit of understanding and then analysis by, or paralysis by analysis, which is just, okay, I think this guy's, now maybe it's, and now all of a sudden plays over, right? Whereas a week ago, it's just, give me the ball, I'm going to look right, I'm going to throw it right, I'm going to get the ball, I'm going to look left, I'm going to throw it left, it's not there, I'm going to look back to the right, I'm going to throw it back to the right. Just a little backyard football. This seemed a little more purposeful, which typically is a good thing. But in this particular game, you could tell that he was really kind of stuck in the mud for a good period of time. He was sped up like we've seen Baker Mayfield be sped up in Cleveland, like we saw him be sped up in Carolina. That little bit of franticness, that little bit of I'm going to pat the ball, I'm going to run, I'm going to step up, step back, step side, and not that smooth pocket presence where, I'm going to slide a little to my left, I'm going to slide a little bit to my right, I'm going to step up, I'm going to make a on the move, make a throw. This was more, I don't quite understand what's going on, I need to get out of here, nobody's open, run around, and it just seemed discombobulated and not very good, frankly. I think that's probably what you're going to get on Saturday against the Broncos. Now, it'll be a little better because the Broncos are lousy, but I think this is where you are with the Baker Mayfield experience right now, which, by the way, is not the end of the world. This could be, and we talked about this on Locked On Rams, this could be what you were hoping for, which is he comes in and has little flashes where he looks good, so you can get excited about what he might be able to bring to your team if he really did understand what was going on. But he's not out there lighting it up in the sense that somebody else is going to say, okay, give me a chance. There's a reason he's the first number 1 overall pick to have ever been on 3 teams in his first 5 years in the league. That's not a list that you're looking to be on. That is not a list that is an indicator of how well you've played at your other 2 stops. It's a list that says this is a guy that has really struggled in his first 2 stops. I would love to have Baker Mayfield as the backup quarterback of this team. I think that he would be an incredible addition. I think that he's the best you can hope for in a backup spot. But this idea that he was going to come in there and light it up and win a bunch of games at the end of the season, look, they got one. They might get a second one against the Broncos on Christmas Day. But beyond that, I think that what you saw last night is what you're going to get. Also factor in the fact that it was bitter, bitter cold. It was about 10 degrees. Wind was blowing hard. And it makes it hard for him. Aaron Rodgers didn't light it up last night either. But it just, you could tell that Baker was very, very limited in his second game as a Rams quarterback. I'm still optimistic that they can make something work with him long term. I'm still optimistic that you can bring him back into the fold and maybe, resurrect his career to a certain point. But he's got to do it under Sean McVay. He's got to do it behind Matthew Stafford. And last night looked a lot like the Baker Mayfield from Cleveland. It looked a lot like the Baker Mayfield from Carolina. And it just was, at its best, it was okay. And it wasn't at its best very often, I guess is the best way to put it. All right. What are the other things that the Rams actually, they broke a record for themselves last night, and it still is kind of an embarrassing situation. That's coming up next on Locked On Rams. All right, I'm stoked to talk about our new partner and sponsor of today's episode, the mobile game Ultimate Football GM. Have you ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the entire season, and lead your team to glory. Here's what you're responsible for: hiring the right coaches and coordinators, not easy; trading players, making draft picks, and navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, and all the ups and downs of a season. All of this is in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to do it. Plus, think of all this junk you can talk to your buddies when you say, told you I could do a better job than that guy, told you I could do a better job than he would, and I told you I'd do a better job than you. Locked On Rams listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On. That's all caps in the game store. That's Locked On. So make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. So holidays are here, right? And you're getting ready to maybe go see somebody, go on a little bit of a trip, maybe go skiing, go something fun, and you're going to need a car to do it, right? This is where Turo comes in. It's the world's largest car sharing marketplace. You don't have to worry about renting a car somewhere else. You got to get the Turo app on your phone. Go to Turo.com. You can book that SUV, throw all your ski gear in there. You can book a minivan for the family to make the trip up to grandma's for the holidays. You can get that pickup truck, go run the errands that you've been trying to get done. Maybe you've had your eye on that electric car and you want to give it a test drive. All of it is available at Turo.com. I've used it myself. We went on vacation up to Idaho a couple of summers ago. It was great. You got to go check it out. Turo, go check it out. Turo. Thanks for making Locked On Rams your first listen every day. Make sure to check out the Locked On Sports Today pod, the biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's Take of the Day. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so I thought it was interesting that the Rams head coach, Sean McVay, was as complimentary of Cam Akers as he was after the game yesterday. I was listening, obviously I do the post-game show, and he comes on with Jamie Long and Maurice Jones-Drew, who do the play-by-play, and he was very quick to compliment Cam Akers. He was very quick to compliment Cam Akers in his post-game press conference as well. I've mentioned on Locked On Rams several times over the course of this season that the Rams were the only team in the league that had not had a running back go for 65 yards in a game. I'm not talking about a 65-yard run. I'm talking about collectively 65 yards from one person. Well, they're off that list because Cam Akers got 65 yards. On the nose, he got 65 yards. So it only took him 14 games to get there, 15 weeks. He only had to be sent home for the better part of a month to kind of get him to snap back into the team program. But I thought it was interesting for a couple of different reasons. Number one, that Sean McVay went out of his way to praise Akers as much as he did, despite the fact that it was a pretty modest effort. I mean, by Ram standards, it was pretty good, but 65, it's not like he went over 100 yards on the ground. He had exactly 100 yards in total offense. He also had 35 yards receiving. But this was a guy that was in the doghouse for a good chunk of the season, to the point where the Rams were trying to trade him, to the point where they told him to go home, don't even come around the team anymore for several weeks. And now he's your number one running back. He's your featured guy. It was peculiar, especially, when things go poorly. What's the refrain from Sean McVay? It's the refrain not just from Sean McVay, but from all these, I need to go and see the film. I need to figure out exactly what happened. It's hard for me to say without seeing the film. Well, he didn't need to see the film to say that he thought that Cam Akers was pretty good, and it was just 65 yards. And I'm not trying to throw cold water on Akers' performance. I thought it was fine, but it wasn't extraordinary. It wasn't like you're watching it and go, oh, man, Cam Akers is killing it tonight. It was okay. He had a couple of nice runs. He had a 10-yard, 12-yard run to start the game. He had another 15-yard run later in the game. But, okay, so there's 25 of your 65 yards. That means he only had 40 yards on his remaining 10 carries. It's okay, but that's not exactly what you're looking for. It's not exactly what you're hoping to get accomplished in an NFL game on the ground, especially in an NFL game on the ground where it's 900 degrees below zero, the wind's blowing, it started to snow at one point. You're going to need the running game to get going. And it's not just a Cam Akers, what's the matter with this guy kind of situation. Everything about this team has led to the fact that they don't run the ball well. Number one, they don't give one guy a bunch of carries to get him lathered up and get him ready to go. Number two is the offensive line has been, of all the things we've talked about on Locked On Rams this year, that's the thing that we've spent the most time with, is the fact that the offensive line has been in shambles. And it happened again last night. Brian Allen, their starting center, played two plays, and he came out and they had to slide Sheldon Coleman back in there again. Just kind of speaks to where the Rams have been this year on the offensive line. It speaks to the fact that their quarterbacks have not been nearly good enough to keep defenses honest. They know that they're not going to get beat in the passing game, so they load it up and they're able to control the running game. And I shouldn't even say load it up necessarily. They're able to control the running game without having to do a whole bunch of things to control it in the first place. That's what this was. That's why I thought it was kind of peculiar that McVay went out of his way to praise Cam Akers. Now, he runs hard. He went in there and he was making, good, hard runs. But typically when you have you're thinking, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler getting in the end zone a bunch of times, whatever it may be. This was a very modest performance from a player who's had a very modest season. I think what is interesting, and we'll see what happens once you get into the offseason and beyond, is Cam Akers still a part of what you do moving forward? Darrell Henderson's gone. Darrell Henderson went to Jacksonville, and then Jacksonville said, nah, we're good. We don't need him. So he's available to whoever wants him. Kyren Williams has really not shown you a ton in the limited time that he's been given an opportunity. Malcolm Brown is clearly not the answer there. So is Cam Akers your guy? Do you draft one? Do you go into free agency? Do you find somebody in a trade during the offseason? What do you do to try to get these things done? I think that's one of the big questions for the Rams. But what seemed like something that would have never been in the option tree, bring Cam Akers back and give him a bunch of carries, all of a sudden feels like not only a possibility, but probably the most likely outcome of what they've been doing over the last couple of weeks. And again, they got 3 more weeks to go. Maybe they'll find some sort of rhythm. Maybe they'll find some way to get him going. But I just thought it was pretty peculiar that he was getting the praise that he did on a night where you run for 65 yards. All right, coming up next, unfortunately, just kind of bottom lining where the Rams are through their first 14 games of the season. 3 more to go. What's there left to play for? That's straight ahead on Locked On Rams. Have you gotten into PrizePicks yet? You really need to give it a shot because it is so much fun to do. And it's so easy to do. You don't have to compete against a bunch of other people. It's just you against the projections available. And you're saying, Trav, tell me about PrizePicks. I'm going to tell you about PrizePicks. Here's what you do. You pick between 2 to 5 players. And if they go more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10% on your money on any entry. Here's what it is. For instance, think about Patrick Mahomes. Do you think that he's going to throw for more or less than 320 yards? Derrick Henry, more or less than 85 yards. Cooper Kupp, if he were playing, more or less than half a touchdown. Tyreek Hill, let's use him as an example. Does he catch more or less than 3 passes? Those are your numbers. You look at your PrizePicks projections. You decide if it's going to be more or less than that, and you win your money. That's it. It's safe. It's fast to withdraw the money. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's just that easy. And you're thinking, I don't really do football a ton. I'm really more of a basketball guy. They got NBA, baseball, hockey, golf, college, everything you want. They got cricket, okay? If they got cricket, that means they have what you're into too. Here's how you do it. You download the PrizePicks app. You go to prizepicks.com. You sign up and you play daily fantasy sports. And first-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. So don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On and sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. Thanks for making Locked On Rams your first listen every day. My name is Travis Rogers. Follow me on Twitter and make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Rams pod. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Rams YouTube channel as well. All right, so 4-10, 3 weeks to go. You got the Denver Broncos, Los Angeles Chargers, and Seattle Seahawks are your remaining 3 games on the schedule. The one game that you probably feel pretty good about winning in this one is coming up on Christmas against Denver. Probably not going to beat the Chargers and the Seahawks. Who knows? It'll be a road game. It'll be cold in Seattle, and the Seahawks may or may not have something to play for. Fact of the matter is, best case scenario, you're winning 7 games. You're not going to win 7 games. Maybe you get to 6. Probably not getting to 6. 5 feels like the number. So you're going to have a season that finishes 5-12. Which is just beyond the wildest projections that you could come up with. If at the beginning of the season you said, hey, I need you to come up with a scenario where the Rams only win 5 games. And by the way, they could only win 4. The Broncos could beat them. What would it look like? It would look a lot like what we're seeing right now. A ton of injuries to an important position group, namely the offensive line. All sorts of turnover at the quarterback position. They played 4 different quarterbacks, started 4 different quarterbacks, lose your best offensive player, Cooper Kupp, for a big chunk of the season, and then have a couple of guys underperform. Looking at you, Allen Robinson. All of those things would have to go the way to put a team that just won the Super Bowl into a position where not only are they underwater wins and loss-wise, but they look bad doing it. And this is the part that really kind of was driven home last night for me, which was this is just a bad team. This is a team that has had all sorts of injuries. There are some explanations, but there hasn't been other than the Raider game. And look, let's be honest about what happened in the Raider game. The Raiders allowed that to happen. If any other team in football were out there, that probably doesn't go the way that it ended up going. Now, I'll take it. It was an incredibly exciting win and a highlight in an otherwise highlightless season. But this was a perfect example of a team that was really top heavy, a team that really could not afford to have any mistakes, a team that couldn't afford to have any sort of injuries. And then once you got past those top line guys, there wasn't much there. This has been think about who they've beaten. They've beaten Atlanta, bad team. They beat Carolina, bad team. They beat Arizona, bad team. They beat the Raiders, bad team. Not one win against a team with a winning record. And that's the part that I think is interesting is probably the best way to put it. A little alarming is probably a more accurate way to say it. This is a group of guys that really needs to get upgraded talent-wise. And I'm not talking about start. They're loaded up, but you got 50 some odd players on a football team. You can't have 6 guys that everybody has heard of and then 40 some odd guys that no one would want. And that's probably an oversimplification, but you're going to have to find a way to build some depth. You're going to have to find a way to move the ball without just having Cooper Kupp do it for you. You're going to have to find a way to get some stops when you have to have them. You're going to have to find a whole bunch of different things for a team that has really been exposed this year. Now, the great news in the NFL, as quickly as it went bad, it can go that good again. I have complete faith in Sean McVay. I have faith in Les Snead to rebuild this thing. They have a second-round draft pick. Maybe you can find a player that you can insert into your starting lineup relatively quickly. Maybe there's trades. Maybe they make another big move. They've been obviously very willing to do that in the past, but this is just last night watching that team play. It wasn't that they played poorly. It's that they played to their ability, and it just wasn't a lot. It just wasn't a ton of juice there. And that's what they've got to get fixed going into next season. That's what's got to change, because watching this for another year is going to be a challenge. And they've made every move you can make to make this as exciting and as compelling as possible. Coming to Los Angeles, rebuilding a brand, being a really good team, star players, build the perfect stadium, win the friggin' Super Bowl. But you throw up a 4-13 season, a 5-12 season, and a lot of that goodwill, you're going to have to start rebuilding it from the ground up again. That was very evident last night, just how thin this team is. And look, if they lose these last 3 games, that would be, what's that? That's 4 + 6. They would have lost 10 of their final 11 games. I didn't think that was possible under Sean McVay, only it's looking like it's very, very possible under Sean McVay. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Rams. Thanks for making us your first listen every single day. Now, for your next listen, make it the Locked On Sports Today podcast. Stories from around the world in 20 minutes. Get the analysis and opinions before anyone else with our local and national experts and insiders. Of course, it's hosted by Peter Bukowski, who is awesome at it. So Locked On Sports Today pod, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, whose house? It's Locked On Rams house.